IoT means. There's a huge variety of IoT device and IoT application. Some of them will be directly over the internet. Most of them will be behind a gateway, simply because the communication cannot go through him all the way around. So let's start. And let's have a look on the threats on IoT. And there are many of them. Way too many that I can put on this slide. There are obviously the worms that exist for Windows machine, but a lot of IoT things over there are still built over Linux machine, over Windows machine. The most common example was that many years ago, around 2001, there is a virus called NIMDA, if you remember. And at some point of time, there was a network for ATM machine, and not the ATM, the 53-byte cells, right? The ATM such as automatic teller machine that were basically distributing the cash. They were on a separate network, so assumed to be safe. But at some point of time, a technical engineer came and connected his corrupted, infected laptop to the network to debug it. Guess what? All the ATM machines were also infected by NIMDA, and the network was down. Now, if you consider it, still talking about this ATM machine, we now have attacks at the application layer for ATM machines where basically you can start them into a mode which is spitting and spitting banknotes for free. Can you imagine this now? A worm propagating to all ATM worldwide and spitting banknotes to every people passing by. I mean, for us, mostly good, right? But if you are working for a bank, probably a little bit less good. Anyway, other threats, they are the usual script kiddies. The university students or somebody who is bored in a conference and wants to do something more fun. Connecting to webcams and see what's happening there. Or changing the temperature into the room. For instance, I do believe that in this room we are under attack. Somebody has put the temperature of this room way too low, in my opinion. So maybe we are under attack right now. More important, and I think it's pretty the case nowadays in most of the IT security, organized crime, advanced persistent threat. And organized crimes mean mafia, but also government. And I shall come back on this, because they can target the critical infrastructure, the nuclear plants, the hydroelectricity dam, and so on, which is, of course, way worse. We are IT people working in data networking. If our network is attacked, what's the risk? In the worst case, you lose some money. As we shall see, in the world of IoT, if something is going wrong, it can be really going wrong, and people get killed. So that's a different game. Okay? We have no time to make a mistake here. Perhaps you know this website, Shodan. What are they doing? They are basically trying to scan the internet using IPv4 addresses to find all devices on the internet. And they do the usual nmap and banner grabbing to understand what's there. And you can go there and ask, for instance, about some sensors. And this is what I did basically a couple of years ago. And you can get temperature in a room, I don't know where. I think it was in Italy. But I redo it this morning and get another sensor displaying a temperature of 23 degrees somewhere in the world. And actually, as I know the IPv4 address, I know exactly where. Okay, at least on the city level. My point is all those devices are not protected. They are tools to scan them. And honestly, do not believe, and I'm an IPv6 person, do not believe that using IPv6 addresses, which are way bigger, that people believe that it's impossible to scan the IPv6 internet. That's wrong. You can still find machines and targets using IPv6 addresses. The only thing, we don't have a shutdown for v6 right now, but it may come anytime. So the threat is there. We can find you. And talking about threats, look about the industrial system, where everything is connected. From traffic lights, parking lots, which is okay, HVAC for temperature, and so on and so on and so on. The most damaging attack is, of course, the DDoS attack. And there has been a couple of bugs in this case. For instance, in Washington, D.C. subway system, there was a bug in the way all the trains and the cars stops and starts. 1 person was killed. Another thing, an accident in Russia, where an engine, a turbine linked to a dam producing electricity, was misconfigured to an information box. Bingo. Multiple people were killed. And if we think about it, the critical infrastructure, most of you remember, I think 3 years ago, a virus called Stuxnet, which by rumor is being manufactured by 2 countries to attack basically the nuclear facilities in Iran. And it was efficient. So now we see states, it's no more one university students that want to impress his girlfriend, like was Nimda, but it's states with big amount of money attacking other states. Of course, we can argue that it's better than bombing a country, though. But anyway. Risk to human beings. I don't know whether you recognize the guy. For people from US, as your past vice president. I think it was with Mr. Bush. So depending where you're coming from, and depending upon your policy stand, you can say risk for human being as this gentleman being the risk itself, attacking others, right? Or actually the case was that he was wearing a pacemaker for many, many years. And pacemakers is also part of IoT. Wow, it's no more a parking slot, right? Pacemakers needs to be tuned. The software needs to be upgraded. How do you do it? You don't open the heart again, right? You do it by Wi-Fi or by some radio wave. They had to disable basically this wireless connectivity because it could have been then somebody passing by with the right software and so on could basically implement another software in the pacemaker of Dick Cheney. So they disable it. And there's been other attacks like this. So you do not need to be a big guy or running a nuclear plant. If you have those kind of device like an insulin pump, we can also by radio because all those things needs to be programmable and must be able to be modified. Okay? There were attacks going there. So, wow, it can happen to all of us. Even more, think about residential user. There's something called smart meters that are basically transmitting once a day, once every minute or something, the electrical consumption of your house. And we can guess in 5 or 10 years, every house will get this kind of smart meters, which is cool because you can see on the spot how much electricity you are consuming and what will be your bill end of the month. Though, if somebody is able to intercept this communication because there were no confidentiality at all in the exchange, a car driving by, assuming it's Wi-Fi or any kind of radio wave, can have a look about your consumption. It can say, oh, for 3 days, this home does not consume any electricity. There must be nobody inside. So it is the right time for a burglar to break into your house and steal everything which is inside. A couple of years ago, in Germany, the Chaos Computer Club, the CCC, get another story. They were able to guess what kind of TV channel a home was listening to or looking at simply by looking at the power consumption. And whether it's a cathode ray tube or LCD screen, whether your screen is dark or light, the power consumption is different. So they were taking samples every 5 minutes of your power consumption. They can guess, oh, you are following this TV channel or that TV channel. Not that good for privacy, of course. So we need to do something. And in this 30, 25 minutes, if I can shrink it a little, no time to explain all the security problem, and even less time to explain potential solution. And the cake of IoT is big. As I explained, it's going from SMS to radio wave sensors and so on. So we need to be, when you have a big cake like this on the table in front of you, what you do, you cut it in pieces. And we needed to cut it in slices. Each slice will be addressed one by one. So for instance, we'll say, hey, those devices are mobile, completely mobile, so they need to get this security risk. Those mobile are fixed, they don't have this security risk, but they've got this, and so on and so on and so on. So my intent now for the last 10, 15 minutes is to cover a couple of those slides and bring new challenges in IoT that you are not used to. We are used to handle DOS, routing issue, layer 2 interception, man in the middle. And to be honest, if you look about IoT protocol themselves, they are pretty good regarding security. If you look about 6LoWPAN, ZigBee, and so on, they do encryption at the layer 2 or the layer 3, a lot of good things. But the big problems are not at the layer 2, layer 3. They are higher in the application layer as usual. So let's focus. One is about the lifetime. And if you allow me to get some kind of a joke based on my employer, we would love that you replace your Cisco router as fast as you replace your iPhone, okay? But it's not the case. But now think about how old is your home. My home is about 20 years old, and I will be living there for 20 years more, so 50 years. My parents also live in the home for 50 years. The meter in the house of my parents is 50 years old. Tonight, we go to the reception at the City Hall, which was, I think, one of the oldest buildings in Brisbane, most probably 100 years. I'm pretty sure that the meter there is 50 to 60 years old. So why am I talking this? Look about crypto. You all remember DES, Data Encryption Standards, coming from Lucifer by IBM, modified by NIST, and as at that point of time, and become DES in '77. About 20 years later, Electronic Free Frontier built a machine using processors and so on to run a brute force attack on DES. When the machine was built, it took 20 hours to break any DES encrypted text. 20 hours. It was basically the proof that DES was over. And indeed, 2005, NIST removed DES. Why am I explaining this? It takes now 20 to 30 years for a crypto algorithm designed by IBM and NSA and NIST to become obsolete. And 50 years old smart meter. How do you manage this? My point is that we are installing devices that will stay there for many years, way longer than the strength of any crypto algorithm is used. So after 20 years, 30 years, all those IoT things will become obsolete regarding crypto, which is not good. It's not only about the cost of replacement. We all have heard about Windows XP, that this April is no more supported by Microsoft. But we still have companies running Windows XP. I don't know if you have read in the press the credit card numbers that has been cracked and released by hackers, seems from Russia, because they break into Home Depot, which is a big retailer brand in US. On the point of sales, so that are also things in IoT, those point of sales, the registers, were running an already outdated version of Windows XP. So my point, very difficult to make upgrades, even for a register where you get direct access to it. So what about sensors that you will put into the ceiling, for instance, for temperature? Not easy. Even public key crypto, RSA keys, XIO9 certificate, electronic curves. You have heard and read about quantum computer. They are, for now, very limited and basically unsuitable to corrupt crypto. But what about 20 years? Right? A complete set of crypto, the public key, could become obsolete in 20, 30 years. It would be really, really challenging. Think about all the changing of certificates, for instance. Up to the point, if we go completely into the sci-fi part of this talk, there are people doing cryptography called post-scriptum. And you may want to search about post-scriptum cryptography over Google, and you will see a couple of papers there. So, taking long. But again, this telephone has been there in our house for many years, so why not the IoT? Different things now. We are used to rely on IP address or identities. So basically I call device identity. But in the framework of IoT, you can add something different, which is what I call group membership. We do not care whether you are a specific device, we only care that you are part of a group, a member of a group. For instance, smart meter, you need the former. You really need to be sure that this is the smart meter that you're receiving the bill from. You are not paying the bill for the complete street. On the other hand, in this room, if we put 6 sensors in this room for temperature and humidity, do we care that is sensor number 1, sensor number 2? No. We only care that you are part of this group in this room, that I can trust information coming from you, and that you're in the right place. I don't trust about individual. So group membership becomes a bit more scalable as well. So there are benefits, right? Nothing is bad in IoT there. We can even go further. We can replace identity by proximity. If you are close to something, then you can act on it. And in this example, it's basically a protocol designed by the Rice University, where we need, on case of emergency, but somebody got a heart attack or something, wearing a pacemaker, the guy, the doctor in medicine next by, needs to be able to reprogram the pacemaker. And of course, he has no time to call the normal doctor of his patient on the street dying to ask for the password. But we can say, hey, if I am very close to the patient, within a few centimeters, then I should have the right to reprogram, basically, the pacemaker. The reasoning behind is that if I am so close to somebody, I could use a gun to kill you anyway. Okay? So there is this protocol called heart-to-heart, which basically the pacemaker within the body is looking about the heartbeat. And then the doctor, which is on the street next to it, also put a device basically on the heart. If they got the same signal, then basically is the right person. Okay? Is next to me, is then authorized to reprogram my pacemaker. Okay? Assuming, of course, that the heartbeat has got enough entropy, but it seems so. And I got other papers doing the same thing about radio wave. If we are in the same room, the radio wave noise is quite similar. So if the two of us has got the same kind of fingerprint of the radio wave, the noise, then we can talk together. So another way of doing it. Other challenge in IoT, and this one we kind of understand better as we are networking people. Use case, you have a single internet access, whether it's 4G or DSL or cable or whatever, and you want to share this internet access for your smart meters, your surveillance system, your normal internet access. So basically multi-party. So what about quality of service? What about if somebody specifically of radio wave start transmitting all the time and basically leaving no radio wave bandwidth anymore for the other parties? So no signal anymore available for the surveillance system. Not good. So with this, we can do a few things, right? Networking industry, we have done quality of service for many years. We have done as well VLAN isolation. You know, in all conferences, you can put a sheet of paper next to you called the bingo quiz, the keyword bingo. Okay, so I talk about the PWE protocol for jacket and tie. I talk obviously about IPv6, IoT, and now I put SDN, right? At least there I got 4 keywords as a bingo quiz there. Anyway, so we have some techniques, basically, to prevent those attacks, but maybe not enough. And specifically, what will happen if the CP itself is unmanaged? Where I'm coming from in Europe, most of the CP are managed by the service provider. I don't know in your region. Okay, if it's unmanaged, what can you do for core-US, for instance? Another threat, in this case, is man in the middle. You share the same frequency. So anybody can pretend to be somebody else. Man in the middle attack will become quite common because you share the same layer 2 or the same layer 1. And if you think about those man in the middle attack, I'm afraid we are going into another direction. I don't know whether you know the Chrome browser check that is getting its update from Google and not from somebody else. It's doing it by doing certificate pinning, meaning you only receive updates from a very specific certificate. So it's obviously done over SSL, and this SSL connection must be signed by the server by using this specific certificate. So nobody else can pretend to be Google, in this case, for the download of Chrome. That's kind of secure. It is even very secure. This certificate pinning will have other aspects on people doing proxies, transparent proxies on SSL, because no way to do it. But it also asks the question now, if I am doing certificate pinning on my device in 2014, is there any chance, any probability, that in 2024, Google used the same certificate? Probably no. Okay? So many attack will still be there. Again, the lifetime is kind of a strange thing there. And then, of course, all the provisioning. Of course, you provision your internet connectivity by using your provider, as usual. But what about surveillance? That's another way of provisioning. Okay? What about your audio-video? Another provisioning to be done. If you outsource your smart meter as well, or do you need to provision it? And you need to provision on a party which is not trusted. Most of the provisioning system relies on a trusted chain. But in this case, the internet provider is at least not trusted. And the last point, of course, and we are engineers, not lawyers, but liability. If something is going wrong, who is to blame? The provider, the CPE, vendor, or whatever. So it will not be easy. Mobility. That's nice. If a thing is mobile, then most of the time, like a car in a train, he has some means to report its location, GPS coordinates or whatever mean. So the good point is it's mobile by default. If somebody steals it, it will still report its position, and the position is being changed. On the other hand, it's mobile, it's very easy to steal. On the other hand, if a thing is fixed, it's not assumed to move, then it's very difficult to steal, most probably, because it's fixed in the ceiling or whatever. But it does not transmit its position, because it's assumed not to move. So if somebody managed to steal it and break into another place, how would you know? Okay? Kind of annoying. For instance, assuming a city where traffic is measured by numbers of cars going over the street, and if you are changing the location of those sensors, you take a high bandwidth street and you put the sensors in a small street and vice versa. The managing station, the central side, will get wrong information. Okay, so you need basically to pick your devil here, whether you want to be mobile or not. A very similar problem, always on or not. Do I have batteries or not? Am I always on solar power or whatever? If you are always on, at the application layer, it's very easy to do polls, every minute, every second, every hour. So as soon as a device is compromised, stolen, you notice, okay? Because it does not reply. And then you know you cannot trust anymore on this. But if you poll it basically every hour, every day, obviously if it's becoming into trouble, it disappears, stolen, or whatever, or destroyed, you will notice its absence only at the next poll, which could be 1 hour, 1 day. It could be too late, because that maybe it's exactly the point where you do want to get information from this sensor. And the worst is, of course, sensors that really, really want to spare the battery. And they transmit only in case of emergency, of something wrong happening. Those ones, if they are compromised, destroyed, obviously they will never transmit. So you never know, there are no more there. Not that good. And by the way, this battery consumption, if you allow me a side note, is becoming quite critical in other places, specifically on smartphones doing Wi-Fi and multicast over there. Because the way the Wi-Fi, I'm diverging here from IoT, but it's an interesting problem as well. The way the Wi-Fi is organized is pretty badly done for multicast. Unicast is perfect for Wi-Fi. Multicast is awful regarding the battery for multiple reasons. And guess what? We were talking about IPv6. IPv6 has got MLD and got neighbor discovery protocol that relies heavily on multicast. So IPv6 is not so battery friendly thanks to Wi-Fi. Anyway, back to IoT. Those very small devices, right? They were cheap enough that I forget it in my jacket at home. Those 2-centimeter devices cost a few dollars. And you don't care whether they are Australian dollars, US dollars, or euros, because it's roughly the same thing. They're cheap. Damn cheap. So you can distribute them and put them in buildings, cornfields, or whatever, way more than needed. So if one, for any kind of reason, is destroyed or is no more available, you still have wisdom of the crowd, as I say. So you can average the temperature, the humidity level among the remaining sensors, and you do some kind of averaging there. Again, if you are losing a couple of routers in your network, that's a big catastrophe. If you are losing a couple of sensors in your sensor network, no luck, but that's okay. So, summary, and I think I will be roughly on time. We see that IoT is really, really a broad term. It covers everything. It's nice to talk about it, but it's way large. And we need to cut the IoT problem in smaller pieces, in smaller slices of the cake. And they got different vulnerabilities. You see in the crypto lifetime, for me it's a very challenging one. The provisioning lifetime is also a very challenging one. But we have other things. They can report the position, for instance, so we can detect the guy moving. If we are losing one, that's not a big deal again. The risk can be different. From a nuclear plant going completely wrong, and tell me I'm living 10 kilometers away from a nuclear plant in Belgium, so I do care about nuclear plant being safe, from basically the temperature of a room being the wrong one. Wide variety, which is not the case in usual IT security. So let's be pragmatic and address problem by problem. Let's try to forget IoT as a super overarching keyword, but address one by one, and it will be easier. There is an IoT Grand Challenge that has been opened a couple of months ago, which will be announced in the IoT world with a winner there. And I've read most of those papers, being part of the jury. I can tell you there is a huge amount of proposals there. Again, addressing each one the niche. But niche by niche, we can do IoT making secure, because basically that's work in progress. I'm sorry, I'm coming there with the questions and not yet the answer. But it's also what's part of security. I know that Paul will talk about security later, but being part of the security is nice because you touch different topics every 2 years. Okay, so that's when we are used to it as well, fixing problem by problem. And if you ever wonder why is a Cisco guy talking about it, because we don't really manufacture things in IoT, that's because in IoT, if you want to communicate together, there is a network. And we are used to manage secure network by using abnormal behaviors, deep packet inspection, or whatever. So we wonder as well, what is the added value that a network could bring to an IoT world? And that's basically our interest there. Okay, with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Save your questions. Write it down on the notepad you have in front of you. I'll invite the speakers later after everyone's finished. Then we can have a Q&A. Next speaker is Paul Vixie from Farsight Security to talk about BCP 38.
Hello, welcome. I'm going to talk about something that at least half of you know all about, but the surprising thing to me is the other half of you, because I keep meeting folks who are surprised by how fragile and flaky this laboratory-grade global internet is, and are surprised by some of the things I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm part of an effort now, Source Address Validation Everywhere, SAVE for short, that really is trying to get out, tell the world what needs to be done, ideally get the world to tell their vendors what needs to be done. So I very much appreciate APNIC inviting me to come and talk about this. So, in the year 2002, I wrote these words as part of a ICANN Security and Stability Advisory Committee advisory, and I won't read them out loud to you, except to say I was not reporting anything new in this report. There was two RFCs preceded this. BCP 38 was actually a rewrite of RFC 2267, which had been published 4.5 years earlier. So it was old news when I wrote it, but no one else on the Security and Stability Committee knew that this was a problem. And so I thought, if they don't know, the world must not know, and indeed the world did not know. So on the 10-year anniversary of this, so that would have been October of 2012, about half of us from the Security and Stability Advisory Committee got together and had a party and agreed that in the 10 years since this report had been written, the problem had gotten nothing but worse. This is sad, because it is really the biggest problem that we have. And if we don't fix it one way that is not in our power, it's going to be really expensive. If we have to fix it the hard way that is in our power, it's going to hurt a lot. So we've got a lot of pain one way or a lot of pain the other way. Let me try and motivate you. So if you read about an attack, let's say it's a 400 gigabit per second DDoS attack against Spamhaus or against Cloudflare or against Google, this is what it looks like. From an engineering perspective, there is somebody who's at the top of your screen who wants to attack somebody else who is on, I believe, the left of your screen, but they do not want to transmit packets directly because they just don't have enough bandwidth to really hurt that guy. They can't send enough traffic from where they are to saturate the target's internet connection. So maybe they use a botnet, and then they can get a lot of different attack flows to come from a lot of different attackers. And in this case, the attacker becomes a bot at the top of your screen. But even that is a 1-to-1 ratio. You send one packet containing n number of octets, and the target receives that packet with those octets. And I suppose you would do that if you were an attacker and that was your only choice. If this is your last resort, then this is the attack you run, but it is not your last resort. You have some extremely attractive amplifiers out there. A lot of those are DNS servers, which is how I got involved, but basically the internet does not keep track of where something was supposed to have come from. And if you bounce an attack off of some reflector, and this is on the bottom of your screen, where all you do is spoof the source address of some request to make it look like it came from your victim, the target, the reflector has no idea that that target did not send that packet. The internet flosses that. It's the great washing machine in the sky. By the time the packet comes back out the other side, it could legitimately have come from where it purports to come from. And so you send the answer. And this is it. This is the fundamental flaw that allows these DDoS attacks, sometimes for political reasons, sometimes for ransom, sometimes for competition reasons. There are a lot of different motives for it, but it all relies on this as the fundamental mechanism. Now there's a couple of reasons why this is so hard to fix, because obviously we've got people from Cisco in the room. They know this is a problem. They could certainly just change their equipment to fix this at the far end and make sure that attacker has to use the source address that was granted to him and not just pick one at random. They can't. It's not their fault. There is not a lot of incentive for upfront security engineering. Indeed, the people that run these networks where the spoofed source packets are coming from, if you go and complain to them about this, they will say what I've quoted here. Yeah, you want me to fix this? And what that means is I'll make a lot of investment. I'll upgrade my equipment. I will upgrade my flowchart for installing new customers, my flowchart for break fix. I'll have to audit. I'll have to train my people differently. I'll document things differently. And that all costs money. It's not a lot of money, but it is some money. And I will once in a while get it wrong, in which case my network will be down because of this extra complexity. It's an additional opportunity for typographic errors in config files. So I'm going to get that wrong once in a while. It's going to bring my network down. I'm going to have some costs, some hard monetary costs, some soft non-monetary costs. And the only beneficiaries will be other people. My customers will not benefit from this. It will save me no money. It will make me no money. But it will save money for other people. It will save money specifically for my competitors. So that is a difficult value proposition for some CTO of some internet service provider to make to the management team or to the board or to the shareholders. Yeah, I want to spend money to make the rest of the internet safer. No. Would be the answer they're likely to get. So there just isn't incentive for monitoring your own output. This is, as I'm writing here, the chemical polluter business model. You put a factory on the side of a river somewhere, the profit is local, the externalized costs are downstream of you. And in the absence of a regulatory regime, that business model makes sense and everybody will do it. In fact, ultimately, the factories who operate that way will be more profitable, more economically efficient, and they will be buying the assets of the companies who don't operate that way. So there is a trend toward that kind of efficiency, and it's just the way capitalism works. By the way, I am a capitalist. I just want to say it has some limitations. Under capitalism, half the world starves. The other half has diabetes. Without capitalism, we'd all starve. So those are currently our two choices. I'd like a third choice, please. So there are some hopeful signs. I used to work at Internet Systems Consortium, and there is some technology that we piloted in Bind that then got uptaken also by NSD called response rate limiting. So in the picture I'm showing you here, this is Affilius, who runs the, I guess, .info name servers. And they were getting used as a DDoS amplifier, so they were that bottom box in this picture here. They were the reflectors. Now, if you're running a top-level domain name server, your incentives are to be as powerful as possible. You want to have a lot of computers, a lot of 10 gig Ethernet connections, a lot of load balancers. You want to put these all over the world so that you just cannot be DDoSed off the map. Because, if some top-level domain is unreachable, then a large part of the internet appears to be dark to a large other part of the internet. So you don't want that. So you're building really powerful reflectors, as in the bottom box here. And that was their situation. Afilias, in this graph, the negative portion below this zero line is their input graph. So that's a couple hundred megabits a second of query traffic. And what's in the positive range was their output, which is a couple gigabits per second of response traffic. This is it's a good depiction of DNS, which is a natural amplifier. Responses are bigger than requests. And this is true even without DNSSEC, although DNSSEC is better if you want to use a name server as a reflector. But anyway, what you can see is that on Thursday, they installed the response rate limiting patch. And the input stayed the same, but the output went back to what it should be. So they started to be able to answer only the queries that were statistically unlikely to be part of an attack, and that saved them money. This was actually a well-aligned incentive for Afilias. They installed this patch because they had to pay for all of that output bandwidth. They also had to get called on the phone by a lot of people saying, hey, you're DDoSing me. Okay, well, so it was a popular patch, and NSD has it now also. I think most top-level domain name servers now run this, and that's, I guess, a good thing. So it's a hopeful sign with regard to this source address validation, except that it is a near-end solution to a far-end problem. Right? The problem these folks are trying to solve is that these queries are allowed to be spoofed by all of these botnets on all of these different ISPs and all of these different cloud providers. That's the actual root cause here, but nobody has the ability to upgrade other people's networks, unfortunately. So what you're solving this where you are with the tools you have by acting on the near-end things that you're in control of. And that's kind of, what do I want to say here? That is low leverage. Right, so David Eisenberg wrote famously in 1997 about the intelligent network, which is the phone company in the United States had a name for what they were trying to do with the voice networks and ISDN and all this other cool stuff. This was obviously a crazy idea. What we needed was the internet. What we were getting was X25 and things like X25. So he said, am I in trouble? No, okay. So he said, no, we need a dumb network in the middle that has no complexity, very little configuration, no call state, no virtual circuit state. We need to put all of that sort of complexity and state holding on the edge of the network. And he was right. We really did need the core to be as neutral and as dumb as possible so that we could create new applications without having to do a sort of a forklift upgrade of the entire core of the network globally every time we wanted to add a new service. And it is, I don't claim that he is responsible for it, but he certainly called it in terms of explaining how something like the internet was going to be able to change the world in the way that I forget his name, Turnbull, was talking about this morning. You couldn't get the internet built on top of modems. We had taken that about as far as we could. Nevertheless, the core is stupid, and it has to be, and so we got what he wanted, but the edge, unfortunately, is also stupid, and it can't be. We just cannot keep running with a stupid edge, or we're going to get these 400 gigabit attacks more and more often. So I'm not saying that that we'll somehow avoid melting the ice caps. I'm not saying that we should. I'm just saying that if we're going to melt them, I want it to be for something other than sending a 400 gigabit DDoS to an online gambling establishment using the tools I'm describing here. So the QA budget quality assurance budget on consumer devices scales with price, unfortunately. And if you know in advance that you're going to be spending, I don't know, $10 million tooling up to build a certain type of automobile, then you might be willing to spend $50,000 or $100,000 on crash test dummies to make sure that I don't know, let's imagine the airbags blow up when they should and don't blow up when they shouldn't. But if you're building an embedded Internet of Things device, chances are you don't know what your total revenue is going to be, and you can't calculate your QA budget in advance at the beginning of your product cycle to say, by the way, we need to hire some smart people to try and red team this. And that creates a gigantic problem. So we heard Eric talk about this a little bit, but he didn't use any examples, so I will use one. There was, about 6 weeks ago, an internet-enabled light bulb that turned out to have a flaw, which is that after it joined the wireless network at your house and was therefore taught somehow the wireless key, the PSK or whatever it is, the wireless access key for encryption, it would still be willing to speak the unencrypted protocol that maintained that key. In other words, anybody coming into your house could then inquire of that light bulb what your key was, and it would tell you. So I have 3 challenges for you. Do we have a list of the people who bought those light bulbs so that we could notify them of the flaw? No. Is the light bulb field upgradable? Is that, in other words, a part of the code in the light bulb? Is it in electrically erasable memory that could be reprogrammed? No. It was a ROM. Number 3, is there enough margin in the company and in this product line of that company to pay for the ability to go do a field upgrade on all those light bulbs? No. So now what we have is an attack surface that has been built through efficient capitalism. We have potentially tens of thousands of these, potentially hundreds of thousands of these light bulbs out there with this bug, and we're going to have them forever, or as long as these light bulbs last. So when I talk about edge device quality and the stupidity at the edge, I don't really just mean our laptops and smartphones, which tend to be field upgradable. I'm talking about a much bigger attack surface than that. So here's a fun one. TCP requires that all data that you send be acknowledged, and if it is not acknowledged, then you have to retransmit it. And this sounds like a really good thing, and it is for the most part. But the initial 3-way handshake of TCP requires that one side send a SYN packet and the other side answer it with a SYN-ACK packet. And those 2 packets each take 1 octet of sequence space, and thus they will be retransmitted some number of times if they are not acknowledged. So that means, going back to that picture at the very beginning, the attacker can send a SYN to the reflector, claiming to be from the target, and the reflector will answer what it thinks is the target with at least 3 SYN-ACKs, possibly as many as 20 if you're running Linux, which most embedded IoT devices are. So that is a 20x reflector, and don't let the fact that the packets are not being sent back to back cause you to stop worrying about it, right? 20 packets over a 3-minute period is still a 20x amplification, and if you imagine that these IoT-enabled devices or the various embedded devices or just pretty much every web server on the internet is not able to maintain enough state to send those 20 packets over those 3 minutes, then you're crazy. You can do this yourself. Now, fixing TCP, there is a fairly simple fix to this. I think it's simple. It's going to turn out to be controversial, as these things always are. But everything on the internet has a TCP stack, and most of it is not field upgradable. So if we imagine that somehow the IETF could agree to change TCP to fix this problem, that would take 3 years. And then if we imagine that we're somehow going to upgrade everything on the internet to speak the new version of the TCP protocol, that's about 30 years. So what I'm trying to say here is if we want to apply near-end, low-leverage solutions to the source address validation problem, it is insanely expensive. It is over-the-top, unimaginably expensive. We need to apply the fix at the far end where these spoofed packets are coming in. So you can add state at the near end. I personally think that TCP shouldn't be retransmitting anything until it reaches the synchronization state. And again, that's going to turn out to be controversial somehow. But it's not just TCP. We also have to fix this about ICMP. NTP, all the UDP protocols, every one of these things would have to be fixed. Whereas at the far end, what we have to do is get these, every other network to turn on source address validation. And the IETF has got a working group on this now called SAVI, as opposed to this, which is SAVE, and that's just to improve source address validation. And it turns out there are ways to make it easier to turn this on. Unfortunately, there isn't a way to name and shame. There's no way to test whether a network has source address validation unless you have a host inside that network that can transmit some packets and try it out. You know, if we could survey the entire IPv4 address space for open spoofable networks the same way we do for open resolvers, there'd be a list of them, and we'd be able to, I don't know, name these people on the NANOG mailing list and maybe get some of this stuff fixed. But sadly, you have to be inside to test it. And a lot of these things are, they're not amenable to just buying a virtual machine inside that network. I would like this source address validation to become the default. I was just talking to Eric about it, but I've also talked to Fred Baker at Cisco, because he and I were on a board of directors together, and so we had an opportunity to argue. And I just tried to say, you know, the times when you need this are pretty rare. It's when a customer is multi-homed. And we'd like ISPs with multi-home customers to be smart enough to know that they have to do something different. So maybe we can just make the default be, if you're multi-homed, it's not going to work. But if you're single-homed, you won't be able to spoof. But Cisco's got a long-standing policy of not breaking existing configurations, and I understand why. If I were a shareholder, I'd be glad of it. But what I finally explained to Fred is if you're on the receiving end of a 400 gigabit DDoS attack, you don't, in that moment, have a lot of sympathy for Cisco's shareholders. Anyway, there are some non-technical remediations that are more likely than the technical steps that I've specified here. For one thing, there are countries that do DDoS for hire as part of their national economy. And they do spamming, and they host a lot of malicious content and so forth. And these are just, they should not have a seat at the table. Somebody with a treaty ought to get out there with a backhoe and maybe cut the fiber to certain landing stations until those countries are willing to start incarcerating their criminals and stop treating us as the illicit transfer of wealth from the developed world as their major source of GDP. I'd like to see the compliance burden increased on these device manufacturers. If you're making a CPE device that, let's say it's got NAT, and if somebody is coming from 192, 168, or whatever is your NAT range, then you NAT them, but if they're coming from any other range, you pass the packet through unchanged. That seems wrong to me somehow, and you should not be able to sell that. There should be some kind of a source address validation sticker that appears on these, and ISPs just won't buy your small plastic box to be a DSL modem or a cable modem or a wireless router unless it has that sticker. You could also consider maybe a compliance burden on CFOs and CEOs. In the United States, after the Enron meltdown, it became the law of the land that the quarterly reports had to be signed by the CEO and the CFO so that they could not say, as the Enron people did, oh yeah, I just rubber stamped those. I had no idea that we were lying. And now they have to sign it indicating that they know they're lying. Well, part of the checklist for your quarterly report is, do you comply with ISO 9000? Do you comply with ISO 27000? Do you comply with this long list of things? Can we make it so that they have to disclose to their shareholders whether they have source address validation or not? That would be a thing. And then finally, I want to say, of those light bulbs and of all of the other sort of embedded devices and the industrial control systems out there, Dan Geer made what seemed like a radical suggestion, especially for him, which is getting more and more reasonable the longer I think about it. If you're selling a device that cannot be field upgraded, its configuration is programmed, or its code is burned in at the factory, there's no ability to upgrade it, it should expire. It should have a certain lifetime after which it refuses to work anymore. You would just go buy a new light bulb, because certainly industrial control system engineers understand the idea that after a certain period of time, some devices just have to be changed out even if they haven't failed. That should be true of anything that has logic in it that cannot be fixed in the field, because all software has bugs. So I don't think Dan's proposal is all that radical. And we'll save questions for later. Thank you.
We'll have the floor microphones as soon as Jeff finished his talk. So I'd like to invite Jeff, who is watching the internet, or the internet users, or both. Thank you.
Good afternoon all. I know the air conditioning is brutal, so I'll be as fast as I possibly can so that I can relieve you of your frigid state. This is actually a talk that kind of goes along the same theme as security, but ties into some recent work and discussions that have been happening in Australia around data retention and how private networks really are. You know, to what extent do folk look at what you do? Who's watching? Because sometimes the answer is quite surprising. This is some stuff over the last couple of years, some of it's more local than others. A report from the middle of 2012 where Telstra claims that URL stalking in Australia is, to quote Craig Middleton, nothing untoward. It's normal network operation. They were siphoning off the URLs they saw on their 4G data network and sending that stream of URLs to a rack service located in Dallas in America, which operates under the Patriot Act, so that the ability for others to then spy on that data required no warrants and no other form of interception, and because the data came from aliens in the US, it had no protections whatsoever. But that's okay, it was normal network operation. That's the kind of attitude we see from a lot of network operators, but it's not just networking. Down the other side is an interesting one from the New York Times, dating back a little bit. Target's big in America as well. And they track, like everyone does these days in retail, everything you do. And this is a quote from an article done by Charles Duggan at the New York Times. Andrew Poole had just started working as a statistician for Target when one of his colleagues said, "If we wanted to figure out if a customer is pregnant, even if she didn't want us to know, can you do it?" The answer was, of course, yes, we can, down to the trimester. In this age and in this world, data exhaust is massive business. The big data landscape, sniffing the fumes of your digital exhaust pipe, is indeed a huge business and a very lucrative business, and many, many folk do it. And these days as well, ISPs are being put into the rather insidious position of having to do it by force of regulation if some of these data retention mechanisms, and if the politicians ever understood what metadata really meant, ever come into force. How do we get to this point? I'm like, what was going on that all of a sudden we've bent things around that individuals no longer have the anonymity of crowds. We've got to the point now where the market is a market of one. Every individual is targeted, their needs and products tailored precisely to them. I don't know if any of you have been noticing the ads that get placed on your screen, but often they are uncanny, totally uncanny. They're you. The targeting is that good. So everyone does it. States do it, businesses do it, internet service providers are now being forced to do it, and of course government agencies are doing it too. Can we see it? Because I'm kind of curious at this point. You kind of hear all these stories about it, but the real issue is, can I see it? Online ads are brilliant. Not only are they uncanny, but they're really, really cheap. And as long as no one clicks on them, you don't pay an awful lot, because impressions really, really are incredibly cheap. So at APNIC, we've used online ads to measure stuff. We'll give out an ad, and inside that ad is a 1-by-1 pixel you can only retrieve if you're running V6. So we look at the folk who retrieve this pixel, because it's our servers, and that gives us a pretty good insight as to where V6 truly is across the entire internet. And of course, to get these pixels, you need to do some DNS work. What if the DNS has been signed with DNSSEC? So we can see how much of the world is actually doing DNSSEC validation. All of that stuff is really good and very informative. I can tell you which ASs are deploying V6 and how quickly, and which aren't. I can tell you where DNSSEC is today and where it isn't. We do about 500,000 tests a day. And of course, for these kinds of tests, caching is evil. So what we do is we construct unique URLs. URLs that have never been seen before and will never get seen again. And so when I hand out an ad to you, lucky you, I should see that URL come back to me once from you. Yep. No one else will ever get that URL. That domain name is yours and yours alone. So what do I see? Here's someone who gets a 1-by-1 pixel. Lucky them. It happened at 10 minutes past midnight on the 22nd of January. Yeah. Someone in China, Hainan Mobile. It's their origin AS. This is cool. Whoops. Same URL. But that source address is different. That came from Guangdong Mobile, 68 seconds later. Either Google's ads are doing a really crap job, and that's not Google's job. They do a really good job. But that URL is leaking. You kind of go, 500,000 ads a day over, say, 214 days is a lot of ads. And in fact, we presented 123,110,633 unique end user addresses got ads from Google's ad system, because Google truly is amazing. And as long as you don't click, it's really, really cheap, which is good. But fascinatingly, 1/3 were stalked. 1 in 400 users seem to have attracted some kind of digital stalker out there. And this is just random folk from all over the net, because everyone watches YouTube. And you look at this, committed to you and your privacy in an open web, and you think, what bullshit? Because it is really, really hard to stomach when it's observed that 1 in 400 folk have attracted a stalker, that their browsing history is not private, someone else is looking over their shoulder. So I started to break this down by country of origin, and it's not the most just accurate country of origin, it just uses the RIR stats files, but fair enough. If you live in Iran, we saw 674 people through the year watch something on YouTube that got an ad delivered to them. This is fine. But of that, 111 had that URL stalked. Poor. You can read the rest of the list as well as I can, but I do point out, who needs metadata when you've got Stalkers Australia, that we're leading the America in at least something? And below that, Canada and so on. That's a funny list, including United Kingdom right up there. The stalking levels in some of these countries truly are awesome. So what's going on? Because that's a deeply disturbing figure if you think your privacy is important. So how many URLs did I give out? Everyone gets 4 URLs, aren't you lucky? Because you have a test in V6 that does dual stack, 6 only, etc. So I handed out 431 million unique URLs. And I now start to look at who's doing stalking. 8,309 distinct source networks were doing the stalking. So it's not that stalking is ubiquitous, it's a lot smaller than the number of folk they are tracking. What is it? So the next thing I did was do an analysis of the amount of time between the original URL and the echo, the stalker. And there's kind of 2 parts to this. That's a logarithm of seconds at the bottom because this is over a day. But there are these 3 peaks over to, the right. And those peaks are 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and 1 hour. Obviously, that's not you and your browser, because that's a really strange time sig. But if you're running a web proxy cache, I bet you're running a 30-minute cache refresh cycle. You keep it for 30 minutes and then you refresh it once. If it gets no more hits, you let it drop. And that's some standard config from some vendor. So 90,000 stalks seem to be something to do with a local web proxy. Yeah, not really stalking, is it? We'll get back to that. But that's over on the right. But what about on the left? A lot of the stalking is fast, really fast. Bang, bang. So what we saw with Telstra, for example, in the middle of 2012, that echo fetch was inside of 5 seconds. And what we see is actually the most of these stalks happened inside of 2 seconds. You get something, someone else tracks it. Wow, that is really quick. And it's a different IP address. So it's either someone on the wire really fast, it's not a proxy, or it's your own machine is T-junctioning and heading it out somewhere else. So that local peak, all those local stuff, the local stalking is weird. So have you got viruses? Is this some kind of virus that just simply sits there and goes, look, got to tell the boss everything you're doing? And that's certainly an option there. That's the first side. Your machine, something really close is being compromised. And as I said, the 15, 30-minute, 60-minute peaks, it's middleware. I said I had 8,000 subnets. Where are they? Well, this is the subnets, /24 level, and that's the country of origin. So 339,000 counts came from a subnet located in China, 53,000 counts came from a subnet located in China. Now, there are a lot of internet users in China. There are a lot of people in China. So this should not be that big a surprise, but it's still surprising. If you look at non-Chinese nets, Covenant Eyes from the US comes up at number 17, which is some kind of content filtering parental guidance system, I believe. And so maybe that explains it, that they're checking all these URLs looking for flesh tones. And Research in Motion is doing something, and I'm not exactly sure what, but I suspect it's something to do with content caching. The rest are kind of interesting. So I'm kind of interested as to whether the stalker is living right beside you, right next door in your own machine, or living far away. It's the ones that are far away that get interesting. So what say I take that original list and go, I'm only interested if the stalker is living in a different network from the stalkee, from the person being looked at. So it's the same list, but I prune out the ones that look like proxies, that look like the stalker's very, very close to the subject. And interestingly still, there's this heavy preponderance of Chinese networks, but you notice now, Covenant Eyes are still there, but now AboveNet Communications is doing something in there, as is a network in Thailand. Maybe the Great Firewall of China is just doing stuff. Perhaps, I don't know. So why don't I filter this a little further and say, I want to know all of the folk who are stalking where the stalker seems to be in a different country from the victim. Because is this all a case of national espionage in some sort of case? And here's the new list. This is the list of stalkers who stalk people from other countries. This is still really large numbers. That top one, 205,000 hits from 119.147.146. something. Wow. So I'm kind of going, where are the victims? Are they all Chinese too? Well, they can't be. It's a different country. I've eliminated all the Chinese from this, but there's something really weird about that. I see a very, 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 very small amount of the network. 700 million URLs is nothing. That's a microsecond in the larger internet. Yet I'm seeing something that is fantastically weird, a smoking gun of stalking. What am I saying? Some options that you might want to contemplate, because I don't know. Is this state-based espionage? Is this really the paranoia that all the security agencies fear, that some national vendor's hardware is busy being fielded across the world that leaks URLs like a sieve? I don't know. Is this commercial espionage that, someone's contracted a bunch of others to look on users? Is this just simple data collection trying to make the ads more accurate? Or is someone doing really good viral spyware? Any of these things are possible, I suppose. Maybe we learn a little bit more if we look at the victims a little bit more closely. That's a list of the countries the victims come from and the number of hits. There aren't many countries it doesn't come from. How many countries are there in the world? 198. How many countries have we got here? 175. So the victims seem to come from everywhere. That's weird. It's almost as if the stalker's aiming for a sort of a country trophy bag of saying, I'm going to find folk from every country on the planet. Is any country more prevalent than any other? Well, yes, because if I actually look at the counts, China is right up there. 136,000 folk were stalked by this particular stalker. Taiwan, Japan, you can read as well as I can. But you notice up there the list Australia is certainly there, as is the US, Philippines, Canada. So it's not exactly all Chinese speaking. It's not exactly any particular culture. There's a whole bunch where this particular Chinese stalker is stalking. Whoa. What about relatively compared to the population? In fact, what I need to do is look at the stalking rate compared to the number of URLs. Macau is very heavily stalked, then Hong Kong, and then a tiny island in the Pacific. I don't know why. And so it's a mix of large and small. The top 25 countries with the highest relative rate of stalking, including, oddly enough, even the United Kingdom is up there at number 25. So what kind of stalking is this? Is this really snap, fast, instant stalking or taking a few minutes to get there? What's the delay distribution? This Chinese stalker is good. This Chinese stalker stalks most folk within 2 seconds. And by 3 seconds is almost nothing. So whenever these folk went to a URL, count to 2, the stalker went there too. So it kind of says there's something in your browser or something very close to your browser. Something tracking really, really close. Maybe it's the browser. So let's have a look at the user agent strings because all the queries are coming to me. I know what you're running. I know what the stalker's running. What's the stalker running? The stalker only ever uses one string. So this looks a little bit weird. If this is national espionage, if this is somebody's super secret, equivalent of whatever super spying thing, it's both awfully clever to collect all those different URLs from all those different people and awfully, incredibly stupid. Because why would you use the same address to do all the stalking with exactly the same string all the bloody time? And it's sort of, maybe that's government work. Clever and incredibly stupid simultaneously. Or maybe they don't even know what they're doing. I don't know, but all of the stalkers is using is this single string Maxon's cloud browser, which evidently sets you free, I assume. But what about the folk who are being stalked? This is their strings, their user agent strings and the relative count. Now this gets a little bit suspicious because there's almost no Macs there. I'm like, around here, whoa, the laptops I see, 1/3 of Macs. Out there in the big bad world, 1/10 of the world is Macs. They're all Windows. Maybe this is bug-ridden Windows. Maybe this is virusware. And look at that user agent string. That's an awful lot of Chrome. So maybe this is spyware virus. Maybe someone's managed to knock Chrome apart and that this stuff is leaking URLs selectively from all over the planet. Or not. Because when I first saw this and started looking at Chrome, I did speak to a few folk in Google going, are you sure your stuff is, good? And they went, shit, better check. And they did, because they care just as much as you do. We all care about this. And they said, Jeff, you just weren't looking hard enough. Look at the end. See that Meta SR? That's the real SIG. So this is a different browser. It's not Chrome. It's Sogu. I assume I'm pronouncing that correctly. The Chinese amongst you may correct me. Sogu Explorer 2.x. And almost all of the victims are running this particular browser. Why is it so prevalent in certain communities and not in others? It's one of the few browsers that does pinyin input, Chinese language input. Not many others do that. And they certainly quote, even on their webpage, it connects to the cloud to recognise malicious websites and software. So this kind of leads you to the fact that maybe what I'm seeing wasn't that bad. Maybe this is just cloud mania got mad, that this one browser is leaking like crazy. On the other hand, if I really wanted to see what nationals from my country were doing as they travelled around the world, one of the ways of doing it would be to give them a browser that used their language brilliantly but leaked like a sieve. And I have no idea what's going on here. But certainly what it says is that the internet is not private, it's certainly not secure, but there's an awful lot of folk who are doing an awful lot of third-party analysis of what you and I do. 1 in 400 folk out there on the internet today from this tiny experiment in ads has a stalker. That's bad. Now, it could just be content middleware, it could be a whole bunch of reasons, but other folk are looking at what you do. In America, I'm not a national, I'm an alien. I have no protection under US law. And if my data moves over to that country, there's nothing in it for me, there's no protection of my rights, I have no rights, I shouldn't expect to, and that's okay. That's the way countries work. But this data is exported all around the world. Who gets to see it? What are the rules under which they see it? What's the national regime under which that data is collated, sorted and examined? What's the constraints of privacy about my data, about what I do? And the real question about this is not whether it goes on or not. It does. Are we comfortable with that? Is that something that you and I feel is fair enough? So if we're aware of this at all, and not many are, is what we've done created a world that realistically has made privacy an historical concept. Thank you. There are a number of folk who really did help me in this, and I should give them credit. George and Byron at APNIC, we've spent a lot of time making these ads sing and dance, and their work is invaluable in making this happen. And Warren Kamari at Google, who, when he heard that it was Chrome who was being the victim here, worked very, very hard to make sure that it wasn't. Thank you. Okay.
I'll invite the other two speakers, Eric and Paul. Then we can take questions, or if you have any comments, please approach the microphone and state your name, and if you wish, you can state your affiliation as well before you ask the question or make a comment. So anyone have any questions to ask to the speakers or make comments on their presentations? Taking time? Got one coming.
Hi. I think it's working, George. It's just
you think it's working?
Yes.
All right. I can't help but think that there's a convergence between the risks to things like insulin pumps or other bad attacks on devices on the edge and the risks of large numbers of bad devices on the edge with inadequate security becoming spoof source opportunities. So I saw a convergence in what the first two speakers were saying, that really it's opposite sides of the same problem. We've just thrown away a bunch of trust in the system, and we have to get it back for our own use of those devices, and we have to get it back for the opportunities that other people might suffer from our deployment of the kit. Do you think that's a fair point, that you're kind of reflecting on different sides of the same problem?
Okay, maybe I'll reply before you to respect the order. So the things will be indeed, could be indeed the source of amplification attacks, could also be the destination of a DOS attack. But the real point is you cannot trust things so much, is to trust the first trusted device, the CPE or any kind, somewhere in the chain within the router, where this device can be trusted and could prevent spoofing. Could not obviously prevent being attacked, but at least prevent amplification happening in things.
I agree. I did see two sides of the same issue being described there, and what I want to just point out is the bad guys, the malicious programmers of the world who want to take over these devices, have done some stunning innovation. And if you Google for return-oriented programming, you'll find one example of that. So these light bulbs I'm talking about are not field upgradable. You can't actually change the software that they will boot with. But once you overflow their stack, you can put a bunch of your code into the RAM portion of it and use return-oriented programming to get it to be part of a botnet, even though it won't be changing the software.
So when we played Core Wars on Unix, we were learning how to do this.
Yeah. Tony Hain. So I actually want to challenge George, because it's not just the two, it's actually the third, because if you look at a lot of what's going on in the Internet of Things, they're all phoning home, right? They're being built as cloud-based devices, and therefore you're going to get lots more watching. So your attacks may be coming from organizations that are watching big data, right? And not so much concerned about this. So extend it on further and contemplate that for a second.
So I have a question for you. I have a question for you, Paul. What do you think BCP 38 is going to do for us? Now, let me just preface this with a second with what I see out there in the net today with these ads is more than 3% of the net present to me with multiple IP addresses across a very short amount of time. The NATs are making sure that that user doesn't just have one address, they have the use of a large number of addresses inside one pool. If I'd even do source address validation and prevent massive reflection, can I still not harness a bunch of folk and hide behind the anonymity of a NAT to launch virulent attacks? I'm like, is BCP 38 going to ameliorate or fix the problem?
I think BCP 38 is going to change the problem we can't solve into one that's a little bit more tractable. So with regard to the type of stalking that you're talking about and the things you're seeing in your logs, it's not going to fix that at all. You need to look elsewhere. But with regard to the rest of the unsecure edge that is currently a very willing amplifier for a lot of these attacks, it is a question of economics. If we can cut down the number of places that spoofed source packets can come from, we are going to cut down the size of DDoS attacks, and that's really a much more narrow topic than what you were addressing.
Any more questions or comments before we conclude this session? If not, I'd like to request you all, please give a round of applause to our keynote speakers, technical keynote speakers. Thank you very much. If you are first-time attendee to this conference, the newcomers session will commence soon, in about 10 minutes, as soon as I get there, and everyone else as well, the newcomers. It's actually in the other hotel, right behind this wall, but you have to take the elevator down and then take the other elevator in front of the KG bar to go to the second level to that function room there. But if you're joining the opening social reception, there will be staff in the lobby from 6:45 onwards to guide you to the venue. So until then, thank you very much, and see you again.